tree crop production systems, speaking very generally. And there's a team of us that worked on a CRDF project led by Dr. Sarah Strauss. We learned how the project focused on cover crops in citrus, but we learned a whole lot doing that project. And even though the project has ended, maybe a year now or more, the work is still continuing. And we thought that what we have so far is definitely worthwhile sharing. We know there is a small community that is interested in cover crops, and then a small community that is interested in tree crops. So we thought, putting this network of people together and sharing the little, like what we have, the information out there is really limited. So everything is useful at this stage of things. What I thought we could do, since we're a small group and we have maybe another 10 minutes before we start, and because we all know we have something in common, cover crops and tree crops, that we could go around and introduce ourselves, just names and, primary function at IFAS, maybe what led you into, your interest into this, and where you're located. So I will go through who I see on my screen. Also, I'll encourage everyone, since we're a small group, if you have the bandwidth and if you're able to turn your cameras on, it can be very helpful for the speakers to see people instead of seeing blank screens. So if you don't object to that, feel free to turn your camera on. I think it would help foster community if we can see each other's faces. All right, I'll start. I'm Tara Wade, Natural Resource Economist at the Southwest Florida Research and Education Center. I started working on cover crops a while back when I was working on tillage, no-till. No-till and cover crops lend themselves very nicely in row crop production. So I got an introduction there and I was hooked ever since. So every opportunity that I have to work on cover crops, I do. I primarily work on conservation practice adoption. So this particular practice fits in nicely with that. I will let Sarah go.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. My name's Sarah Strauss. I am a soil microbiologist. And so I got interested in cover crops not long after I started at UF about 7+ years ago. In discussion with some grove managers and got very curious about it. And like Tara said, put together at first a CRDF project to get started, and things have kind of snowballed from there. And so I'm very excited to share some of the things that we've learned and also some of the areas that we're still trying to figure out. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Davie.
Thank you, Tara. Sorry, I was late. Let me join the Zoom link. It was saying you're your host, so I had to figure out a way of doing it. Yeah, so I'm Davie Kadyampakeni. I'm an associate professor of primarily water and nutrient management, looking at citrus. And I've been so much interested in using cover crops for improving soil fertility, water storage, and also improving the agroecology. Yeah, so I think somehow the work Dr. Strauss led, and also with the collaboration of Dr. Wade and Dr. Kanissery, we pulled this off so many seasons of data collection. So more recently, I've also been expanding this and trying to do more work. But for today, I will talk primarily on the project that was funded by CRDF. But I've been looking so much on improving soil fertility and also improving water storage. And there's been something that seems to be lacking in most of our citrus production systems and other tree crops. So I think this will be a good opportunity to share some of that information. Thank you so much. And I'm located in Lake Alfred in Central Florida. Thanks.
Thank you, Davie. And I will go to Shourish.
Yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Shourish Chakravarty. I'm working as a postdoc with Dr. Wade. So I worked on the cover crop project. So I've been working on that for some time, and it's kind of ended, but yeah, I'm still assisting Dr. Wade in our endeavors in this project. So nice to meet you, everyone.
Thank you, Shourish. I'm deliberately putting the team members first because you'll be hearing from us throughout the day. So I figure we could go first and you guys' names would be the lasting ones here. Let me try this again. Mitro.
That's fine. Yes, my name is Miltopia. I'm a biological scientist at Citrus Research and Education Center in the Ecophysiology Lab. I'm not really working in cover crops, but we are very interested in learning about it. So this is why I'm here this morning.
Awesome. Thank you. Manji?
I keep unmuting myself. I think the host is muting me.
Well,
Yeah, I'm
we
getting-
can hear you. We can hear you, Manji.
Okay, yeah, now you can see. My name is Monji Zachary. I am the Citrus Extension Agent in Southwest Florida. My office is located at the Hendry County Extension Office in LaBelle. That's all.
Thank you, Manji.
Thank you.
Daniel?
My name is Daniel Duwachi. I'm currently working with Dr. Karen Case, We Science program. So I'm the postdoc and the lab manager. I've worked on citrus for so many years, and now I'm working on cover crops with projects, a nationwide project, and then in-station projects. So I would love to know how citrus and cover crops are enjoying their life together.
Thank you, Daniel.
Welcome.
All right. Next I see Mariah. Did I pronounce that properly? Okay. Mariah, you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Mariah Williams. I am an OPS at the University of Florida in Dr. Chase's lab. I'm going to be starting my PhD in this upcoming January, working with cover crops as a lead management option. So I was hoping to learn more about that in this talk.
Awesome, and congratulations. Well, I think then we should hear from Ramdas next, since he's going to be talking about the same.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ramdas, we're just introducing ourselves.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
No, yes, please go ahead, Ramdas.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was trying to get into the link. I think there was an issue with that. But anyways, I'm Ramdas Kanissery. I'm a weed scientist, assistant professor, and a weed scientist at the station. So yeah, I'm trying. I will present some of our observations on weed management evaluations from the study we did, and I'll provide some insights into how cover crops can be utilized as the best tool for weed suppression in citrus and other tree production systems.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's hear from Matt.
So I'm Matt Smith. I'm the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Extension Agent. I cover Sumter, Pasco, and Hernando County. I've done some work on cover crops in the past, mostly in vegetables and also in hops production, but not in citrus. So I'm very curious to learn today.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you. Anna? Okay, Anna's audio does not work. All right, Anna. Thank you. So Anna says, hi, my audio doesn't work, but she started working at IFAS Extension Office in Brevard County a little over a month ago. She has an agricultural program assistant, and she graduated from UF with her bachelor's in plant science. Thank you very much, Anna. And Jessica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Riles. I'm the Agriculture and Food Systems Agent right here in Collier County. I work with growers and producers across the county, but I work with a lot of small farmers that do a lot of tropical fruit production. And so I want to see if some of the work that y'all are doing can be transferred into that realm, because I got a lot of questions about cover crops and tropical fruit groves. So I'm just excited to be here and learn more about what y'all are working on. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Mark? All right, Mark does not have micro camera. He's an agent in Marion County. Most of the growers he works with include citrus. Okay, so soil quality is an interest for Mark. Thank you very much, Mark. Prissy?
Hi, good morning. Hey, Davie. I'm Prissy Fletcher. I'm the St. Johns County ag agent. And I love Davie. We were students together a long time ago. And I did my soil science degree focused on pesticide, fate, and transport in citrus. And then I became the ag agent for potato country. And then some of my potato farmers diversified into sod and citrus. So I'm back in the world of citrus. Yay. So really excited about this IST and learning about cover crops. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Prissy. Lourdes?
Hey guys, my name is Lourdes. I am the Ag and Natural Resources agent in Highlands County, and I work with a lot of citrus growers, and I think that's one of the topics that they're most interested on, and one of the topics that I could learn more on. So that's why I was interested in taking this IST.
Thanks, Lourdes. Nice to meet you. Khadijah?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Keisha Scott. I'm the Horde Ag Natural Resources Extension Agent in Wakulla County. And I'm here because this is a topic that I'm very curious to learn more about. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lanesh is the last person I see. I hope I don't miss anyone. Lanesh, are you there? Would you like to introduce yourself?
She texted in the chat.
Yeah, he's in the library.
Right. Lanesh is my postdoc. He doesn't work on cover crops directly, but he is interested, so he decided to join us. He's with me at SWFREC. He does work in vegetable production systems quite a bit, and a lot on say risk type analysis. Well, thank you everyone for indulging. I'm not going to introduce the speakers. I'll let the speakers introduce themselves. The talks should be about 25 minutes to 30 minutes. If we do go over into the 30 minutes, then we won't have time for questions right after the talk, but there is a section in the latter part of the morning at 12:30 or early afternoon around 12:30 where we have a speaker panel, and that will be another opportunity to get your questions, to get your details. All right, so Sarah, please go ahead.
All right, let me figure out where the share screen went on my thing here. I see many links, but I don't see a share screen. Ah, there it is. Okay. Here we go. Share. All right. You guys see everything? Does that look good?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So thanks again for Tara in particular for organizing this. I'm excited about, I'm just going to move this over there so I can see everybody's shining faces. I'm excited about taking this time to share with you some of what we've learned over our couple of years of trying to grow cover crops in citrus. And then, of course, since I am a soil microbiologist, I want to share a little bit of the information that we've learned about how cover crops are impacting soil microbes. I do want to mention that it's fantastic to hear that there are some folks joining us that are interested in other tree crops because that's an interest of mine as well. And I do have a project where we're hopefully in the next year or so going to transition into looking at some of these questions in other tree crops. Because I think that a lot of what we found could certainly be applicable to other tree crops. And so please, keep that in mind as we're going through this, and definitely would love to chat with anybody who's interested in doing that as well. So, all right. So real briefly, because I suspect based on what everybody said earlier, you guys know this information, but what are cover crops? Just to make sure we're all on the same page. Cover crops are crops that are planted to benefit the soil. They're generally not harvested for profit. And so when we're thinking of things in this framework of soil health, cover crops are a key way to impact your soil, because that's their entire purpose. They're increasingly common, and I mean, cover crops are not a new invention or a new management practice. They've been used for as long as we've had agriculture, in various ways. They're more common in row crops, grains, cotton, corn, soybean. They're also slightly more common in vegetable production. And in these systems, they're planted during the fallow period. And so it's a great way to make sure that you've got roots and plants in the ground year round, even when you're not growing your cash crop. As Dr. Wade mentioned earlier, they're frequently combined with conservation or no-till management practices. But they've been less common in tree crops, though again, it's not unheard of. This is a picture that I got from an old book that is from 1929. I believe this was actually taken in California, and so the quality is not fantastic. But on the sides, this is in a citrus orchard. So you've got some citrus trees on the side. There's a guy standing in the middle with a yardstick, and he's in a field of white mustard cover crops. And so that was in 1929. So again, not a new practice, but for a variety of reasons, it's sort of fallen out of favor in citrus and in other tree crop production systems. But why go through all this trouble? Why plant cover crops? Well, they've got a wide range of potential benefits. One of the key things is that they can provide nitrogen to the soil, and I believe Dr. Kadyampakeni is going to talk more about that later on, but I'll mention a few impacts with microbes too. Either just because of this nitrogen can enter the soil either through planting legumes, which fix nitrogen, or just by scavenging nitrogen from the soil. In vegetable crops and other systems, that's usually trying to scavenge nitrogen from the previous crop. In tree cropping systems, it might scavenge extra nitrogen that may have run off from fertilizers, but then it's retaining that nitrogen in the plant biomass, and then that will return back into the soil when those cover crops decompose. It's a great practice for reducing weeds, and Dr. Kanissery is going to talk more about that later. One of the other key things is that it can help reduce soil erosion because, again, you've got plants in the ground all the time. Some of those plants, well, all of the cover crops, but some in particular can be very helpful for reducing soil compaction, which can be useful for a variety of properties and infiltration of water and nutrients into your soil. Cover crops can also increase your soil moisture. They're going to provide some shade for the soils, and so that prevents and helps keep the soil a little cooler, which also helps retain soil moisture. And one of the big ones, particularly for microbes and nutrient cycling, is that cover crops are a great way to increase your soil organic matter. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So because I am a microbiologist, I like to highlight some of the ways in particular that cover crops can help and impact soil microbiology. And so one of those is that if you are planting legumes, cover crops that can fix nitrogen, that's already a introduction of some different microbes into your system, and this symbiotic relationship between soil bacteria that are going to attach and colonize the legume roots. Like I mentioned earlier, this will provide nitrogen to the plants, and so these bacteria fix nitrogen, that the plants use that nitrogen, and in return the plants provide carbon for the bacteria, so the food source. But sometimes this is a slightly leaky process, so there might be some excess nitrogen that comes off of these rhizobia and these legumes as the plant is growing. But the bigger source is that when the cover crop, when that legume plant is terminated, that nitrogen is then available in the soil through decomposition, and then can be used by potentially the citrus tree or whatever tree crops or your subsequent cover crops. And I always like to throw this little factoid in, just, because we all need more trivia bits in our lives, right? And so nitrogen fixation needs a low or no oxygen environment to occur. The reaction that is used for fixing nitrogen doesn't do well when there's oxygen. And so that's why rhizobia form these nodules on the roots, because these are areas where there is very limited oxygen. And so one nodule can contain a huge number of rhizobia bacteria. And to make these nodules oxygen free, there's actually a protein called leg hemoglobin that buffers that space so that there is limited oxygen. And that's actually a very, very similar protein, you can tell by the name, to the hemoglobin in our blood. And so I always like to think of that as our little connection and relationship between rhizobia and ourselves. The other fun fact is that the Beyond Beef burgers have been using leg hemoglobin from pea plants, a legume, to make the Beyond Beef product look red. So there's your fun trivia fact about legumes today. So in addition to nitrogen, cover crops, as I mentioned earlier, can be a great source of organic matter. And organic matter is really critical for soils and for microbes for a number of reasons. But the key one is that organic matter serves as basically food for microbes. And so when we're talking about organic matter, we're talking about decomposing plant material or just plant material itself that is going onto the soil. And so when that enters the soil, again, that's serving as a food source for soil microbes. And so just like if you're at a buffet, the more food you have available, the more people are going to come, right? And so you can get an increase in activity from your microbes. You can also potentially increase the diversity of some of those microbes. And as that activity increases, there's going to be more decomposition of that plant material, which is going to help release nutrients to the soil. That increased microbial activity can release harmful substances or help detoxify or reduce harmful substances that might be in the soil. It can do things like help increase aggregation. There's a whole number of compounds that can be released from soil microbes that might reduce soil-borne diseases or impact parasitic nematodes. But all of those are going to lead towards healthier plants. And so this is where it's just this idea and this ability to add organic matter into the soil can be super, super helpful for a number of factors. But all of those are also very directly linked to that change in the microbial activity and the microbial community composition. And so I'll show you in a little bit some of the data that we found that illustrates this point. Was there a question? I just saw. Oh, okay. People like the trivia. Cool. All right. All right. So before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of exactly what is happening to the microbes when we're adding these cover crops, I first wanted to talk a little bit about logistics and how we actually might actually go about it and what we've been looking at in some of our trials. So one of the first things you have to think about is location. And so for our citrus crops, there's sort of two ideas that you could do, whether we're planting in the row middles, but the question that you might have or a grower might have is whether you want to plant just in the row middle, or do you want to plant trunk to trunk? And so, as you probably know, I mean, most growers keep this area right underneath the tree, sort of herbicide and weed free and vegetation free, for a variety of very good legitimate reasons. But some growers might be interested in saying, let's do the whole shebang and plant cover crops trunk to trunk. We have not tried that in any of our trials. The commercial growers that we've been working with have been reluctant to give that a whirl. And so we haven't tried it. I do know there are some growers that have done it, but I don't have any data from those types of management practices. The other big thing to think about is, again, based on where you are in the state. And so down here in the southern part of the state, citrus are grown on raised beds. And so we have 2 rows of trees with a raised row middle, and then there's a swale. And so we have not been growing cover crops in the swale, again, mostly for logistical reasons, because trying to plant in there can be a little tricky. But so that means then in Southwest Florida, we're really only planting cover crops on one side of the tree. And so that's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about how much of an effect do you expect to see from these cover crops in your tree production. I don't have a picture of it, but we do now have a trial up on the ridge where we are able, because there's no swale, it's all flat, we do have cover crops planted on both sides of the tree. So that trial is still pretty new, but hopefully in another year or so, we'll have some data to share with you about whether that's making a big difference versus just planting it on one side of the tree. So you've got your location. How do you want to, how and where do you want to, well, where do you want to plant? The other question is, when do you want to plant? And so cover crops, you can certainly do annual cover crop species or perennials. Our trials have really only focused on annual cover crops, mostly, again, for practicality and logistics purposes. Perennial cover crops like perennial peanuts can be fantastic. However, they can take a while to establish. And so from a pure practical standpoint, if you are given a grant for 3 to 4 years and it's going to take your cover crops at least 2 years to get established, it doesn't work so well for being able to get useful data. So that's why we haven't really focused on perennial cover crops, but it is definitely an area that I would like to do some work on in the future. We've given it a couple of tries with some grant proposals and haven't made it yet. But I definitely know that there are some growers with some fantastic looking perennial peanut beds, and that's certainly an option for cover crops. But annual cover crops can work as well. And so that's what we've been focusing on. And the really, really critical component for planting annual cover crops is the timing. And so we have been trying to make sure that we time our plantings in the beginning and the end of the rainy season. So we do a planting in the summer, usually around June when the rainy season is picking up. And then we let that grow till about mid-October. And then we will terminate those cover crops and plant the winter planting. Hopefully when there's still some time and still some rain happening in late October, early November to really help that crop get started. But you can see, this is just 2021, 2022 here. Timing of that water is not consistent, as we all know. And so that's, I think, the hardest thing, but also the most important thing that we've learned in planting these annual cover crops, because the whole goal of these cover crops is not to fertilize and not to irrigate. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're getting them planted when there is going to be some water still happening. Of course, then the question is, how do you plant? And so one of the first things is, how do you want to prepare your row middles? Do you want to herbicide and kill off all the weeds that way? Do you want to mow and make sure it's nice and clean? That also relates to how to terminate the cover crop that you might have growing. Do you want to herbicide it? Do you want to mow it? And so we've done both of these, and sometimes just mowing works really nicely. Sometimes we prefer to do a herbicide to make sure we get things really nice and clean. Some of that depends on how good the weed management might be underneath the tree row. As you'll see from Ramdas, we've had some great data on showing reduction of weeds within the cover crops, but if you're not planting trunk to trunk and there's still that space between the canopy and where the cover crops start, that can sometimes lead to some weed problems. And so sometimes then we've gone through and herbicided everything and then waited about 2 weeks and then plant into that. I have some other trials though that have had cover crops now for 4 or 5 years, and just doing a mow, just doing a mow and then a very shallow disc seems to be sufficient to control the weeds and to get a really nice germination of your cover crops. The key is that you don't want too much competition when you're planting your cover crops, so that you have this good germination rate and a good chance of a good growth of the cover crops. We've been using a no-till seed drill to plant all of our cover crops. Certainly you could broadcast spread them. Some of that though, again, depends on the acreage that you're trying to cover. And for the commercial trials that we've been doing, that would not really be feasible. Some seeds also prefer to be slightly buried in the ground. And so that's another thing to think about when you're thinking about how to plant your seeds. But the no-till drill is nice because particularly if you're working in a grove or in some trees that are pretty well established, you definitely have roots growing in those row middles, and you don't want to be disturbing those roots too much. And so having that no-till drill seems to be a nice option to get those cover crops growing, but without chopping up a lot of your citrus roots. Of course, the next question then is what to plant. And some of this depends on some of the goals that you or the grower might have. If they're really focused on getting some nitrogen, then trying to have some of these nitrogen fixing cover crops can be helpful. If they're interested in nematode management, they might want to make sure they include some of those. Some of these cover crops are known to be a little bit better at suppressing weeds, though I think planting cover crops in general has had pretty good weed suppression. And again, Ramdas will talk about that more. But the other big question or big thing to think about when you're planting is when are you planting it? And so this table, the orange ones are warm season cover crops, so things you can plant in our summers. And the blue ones are cooler season, things that you can plant in the winter. That said, sun hemp in South Florida, we can plant year round, but if there's a freeze, it fizzles out. This is an area where we are still doing a lot of research and trying to really hone in on what are the right varieties, what are the right species to plant at different times of the year. All of our trials so far have been mixtures of cover crops, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We haven't really done any monocultures. And so we're typically mixing, well, we've looked at the contribution of legumes, but most of the things that we've been looking at are mixtures of legumes and non-legumes, and trying to have that variety in our mix. This is a table that is hopefully going to be coming out in an EDIS shortly, but I'm also happy to give anybody a copy as well. And again, what to plant also depends on some of those goals that you have. That said, when you're thinking about planting legumes and really trying to get some of that nitrogen from those legumes, you have to also think about the type of legume cover crop and how it's going to be terminated. This is an area where we actually still need a little bit of research. Most of this information is from areas that are not necessarily in Florida. And so looking at how nitrogen is being released from these cover crops is an area of ongoing research. And I know a couple of colleagues that are looking at this. But it's not to say that all the nitrogen that you're planting in your legumes is necessarily going to be immediately available in the soil once you terminate that. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, before I move on, all right. Oh dear, I'm already going over. Okay, we'll see what I can do. Real quick then, I wanted to share a little bit about what we are doing with some of our field trials. And so I want to share with you some results that were from this CRDF trial that was here in Southwest Florida, where we planted cover crops twice a year, again in June, May, June-ish, and October, November. Like I mentioned, we planted mixtures, and so we had treatments that had non-legumes only, and then treatments that had the non-legumes plus the legumes. And then we had a no standard, or a no treatment or a grower standard control. And so what was really interesting is that the impacts on the soil microbes really depend on the conditions and depended on the grove and how well that cover crop grew, which sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but it was very interesting to see the data really illustrate this. So these, if you haven't seen these charts before that I often show in my talks, each shape here represents the total bacteria or fungal community composition of one sample. So the closer together those shapes are, the more similar that community composition is to another sample. And so what I want to point out is, and so we did this trial in 2 different locations, both had the same rootstock, same scion, both were planted about the same, the trees were about the same age. But this one, if I have to look at my other screen so I can see, the triangles here are the bacterial community composition. The triangles and the diamonds are the bacterial community composition in Grove B. And so the triangles are at the beginning of the trial. The diamonds are at the beginning of the trial, and the triangles are 3 years later. And so you can see that more or less they're all grouped together. There's not a whole lot of difference in that bacterial community composition from the beginning of that trial to the end of that trial in Grove B. Same deal with the fungi. And so these in the Grove B, cover crops really didn't have a major impact on that bacterial and community and fungal community composition. Now, there were some differences from year 1 to year 3, and that's not surprising, but there weren't really any impacts of the actual treatments, which are shown in the different colors. However, in Grove A, this is showing in this orange circle here, we've got the circles, which are the bacterial community composition in the standard, in the grower standard control at the end of the experiment. And the squares are the bacterial community composition of all of the samples, all the treatments in Grove A at the beginning. And so after 3 years, the grower standard was more or less the same as what everything was when we started the experiment. But the bacterial community composition underneath the legume plus no legume and no legume only cover crops was significantly different. So those cover crops were impacting the bacterial community composition. Same deal with the fungi. I'm going to hold off on the question here so I can pull through, and then we'll have time later. But I do see your hand. So the overall community composition was impacted by planting cover crops. We also saw changes in what the functions of these organisms are. So we saw changes in, particularly when we look at the nitrogen cycle. So we saw changes in the organisms that are involved in ammonia oxidation. Red is 3 years after 3 years of cover crops, and blue is before the trial started. This is only for Grove A because we didn't really see big changes in Grove B. But you can see that there were big differences in the abundance of these ammonia oxidizing organisms underneath the cover crops for both types of cover crops. But we saw a bigger increase under the legume plus non-legume. So we're seeing changes in what types of microbes are in these soils. We're also seeing big changes in what types of microbes are part of the denitrification cycle. And so this was actually incredibly impressive to me and something I didn't expect to see. But these are organisms that are involved in going from NO2 to NO. and they all have this NERK gene. And so you can see that the bacteria with this ability in the grower standard control was completely different than the bacteria with this ability underneath the cover crops. And we saw an even bigger shift when we look at the organisms that are able to go what we call complete denitrification, taking N2O to N2. And so you can see here the green is the legume plus non-legume, the orange is the non-legume only, and the blue is the grower standard control. So we're seeing completely different types of bacteria underneath these different treatments that are able to do this particular part of the denitrification cycle. We saw a bunch of different, saw changes in a bunch of other potential functions of the bacteria. I'm not going to go into all the detail here now for them. But some of them are that we saw increases in carbon metabolism, and some of them, again, more with nitrogen metabolism. So planting these cover crops are changing not only the composition of the microbes in the soil, but also what those microbes are doing. And just real quick, yes, these cover crops are being planted in the row middles. And so then the question is, are they actually changing what microbes are around those tree roots? This is really tricky to measure in the field. So we did a greenhouse trial recently where we took soil from underneath the cover crops and brought it into the greenhouse and planted trees. And we can see that, yes, there are differences in the organisms and the microbes that are growing around those citrus tree roots when you plant soil that has had cover crops planted in it versus if you had soil without cover crops. And so, yes, we are seeing that these cover crop the changes in the soil microbes due to cover crops can also change what microbes might be around your citrus tree roots. So real quick, cover crops can provide many benefits to the soil and the cropping system. What and how you plant them depends on some of your management goals. Certainly they can impact the soil microbiome, but the magnitude of impacts can vary. And the no-brainer there is if your cover crops grow, you don't see any changes in your soil microbes. I will say, and I think Davie's going to talk about this a lot more, the benefits of cover crops to crop production can take time. And so this is definitely a long-term investment. We see these changes in the soil microbes pretty quickly. And so for me, that's an early indication that change is happening. But translating that change into the trees might take a little bit longer. So with that, I have to thank all of my fantastic collaborators, our funding, and all of the people in the lab that actually do the work. So sorry, I ran over.
Thanks, Sarah. That wasn't so bad. Why don't you transition into your slides while Sarah answers Mitro's question? Thank you.
Mitro, you have a question?
Yes. I have a question, and thank you for the great presentation. I've learned a lot. So you said one of the common practices is planting in one side of the tree. So I was wondering if only this side of the tree will benefit of the positive effect of the cover crop.
That's a great question. And that's one of the reasons why we're excited that we have a trial going on the ridge where we're planting on both sides. Certainly, I think there are going to be more direct impacts obvious on that side of the tree, but you know, the tree is it's a whole organism, and there are roots that are going all over the place, and so I don't think that it's going to necessarily generate a lopsided effect on your tree. Nutrients that are taken up by the tree are circulated through the entire organism. So I hope that that's not the case. That we would see a lopsided. We haven't seen anything like that yet. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you. I'm sure there are probably other questions for Sarah, but we have a break scheduled, so maybe we can sneak them in there, and we do have a panel discussion scheduled as well. All right, thanks, Ramdas.
So can you see my screen, everyone? Okay. All right. I'll take it from here. Hey, good morning again. It's a great day. and it's Friday. So I'm gonna switch gears here from what my colleague Dr. Strauss was saying. The benefits, an important benefit of cover crops, which is basically weed suppression. So utilizing cover crops for weed suppression. So this is how this is some of the topics I'm gonna cover in this 25-30 minutes. I'll give you a brief overview. Then I'll talk about some of the weed control mechanisms by cover crops. Then some observations we have made in terms of weed suppression and control from the projects we have done. Very important aspect, weed seed bank depletion, some of the additional benefits. Then Sarah already talked about it, but I'm gonna show you some resources where we can look for some examples of cover crops for Florida. And then termination, which is very important in terms of weed suppression. So cover crop termination consideration, and I will summarize it. So a brief overview. So for those, I understand, some of you are working with citrus, but some other tree crops. But generally, if you want to know a citrus weed management system or vegetation management system in Florida, we like to keep a weed-free tree row. And we like to keep the row middle areas in between the tree rows, some vegetation to make, especially when you think about Florida, severe weather, storm, and rainfall, especially with the sandy soil, this vegetation really helps to keep the soil in place. But in other areas such as Texas or California production systems, you may not see this row middle vegetation. Rather, they will try to keep the whole orchard floor or grove floor weed free. So that's a weed management system we have in citrus production here. So why weed management matters? I like to bring this small piece of data. I mean, we have been observing this in several of our trials and studies. I mean, it really helps growers when they try to manage their weeds, they can actually enhance their profit. For example, in this piece of data, if you look at the harvest weight of oranges or citrus per tree, if it's a weedy, like on the x-axis, I have two levels of weed control, a weedy as well as weed-free, where you're keeping more than 75% of the weeds under control. The growers are going to see an approximate 25% increase in the yield, right? So that really helps. Not only that, apart from increasing the profit, weed management also really helps the grower in their integrated pest management and disease management efforts as well. For example, in a study we have done, a collaborative study in our group, we found that many of the common weeds that we see in citrus in the grove or in the perimeter areas, like Spanish needle, dog fennel, and primrose, they can actually act as a way station or a stopover place for Asian citrus psyllid, ACP psyllids. So if there is a pest management program going on in the citrus grove, they can come to this weed, stay there, take some nutrition or moisture, whatever, and then it can go back to the grove. So keeping the weeds out of or check in the citrus grove really helps reduce competition with the crop, as well as increase the profit, and helps the grower in enhancing their pest management and disease management efforts as well, right? So it is very important. Weed management is an important component of the production budget in growers. So typically they spend about 12 to 15% towards weed management. So what we are trying to do is, my program, we are focusing on getting the best out of these programs. Whatever they're doing, get the best out of it, especially in these times of citrus greening and HLB. And we need to bring in more tools that are more sustainable in nature as well. So here is a picture of a very well-managed citrus grove. You can see a nice mat of grass or vegetation in the row middle. At the same time, a very clean under tree area. This is a typical weed management system that we have in citrus in Florida. But that's not going to be this case all the time, because I want to invite your attention to this picture where you can see the weeds, the vegetation is kind of taking over in the row middle. So one thing I want to bring to the table here, everything starts from the row middle, because you're going to see these row middles, if it's not really well managed, that's going to be the source of seeds for a weed problem or weed infestation into the tree rows. And again, when you think about the competition, we need to make sure the tree rows are weed-free, relatively weed-free. At least 75% of the weeds should be managed so that you get a good yield, right? So the message I want to bring to the table here, to the team or the group here, weed management in the row middles are very important. And this is the message we are trying to give to our stakeholders. It's often overlooked. So if you have a good practice in the row middle, it's a good start. And it's going to go a long way throughout the season to manage the weeds under the trees, right? So we have a lot of tools for weed management in citrus. I'm not going to go into detail in any of this, but I like to say that there is a toolbox, depending on the location, grower preferences, and weed pressure and things like that. You take the right tool, you pick the right tool for the weed management. For example, prevention. Then mechanical, an example for mechanical weed management is mowing. Chemical, which is the most utilized way. Herbicides are easily available. It's relatively economical, and it gives you more extended duration of weed management. And so that's the most popular for citrus. But cover crops technically is grouped under a strategy, cultural strategy for weed management. So that's what we are focusing in this session. Cover crops is not new. We know several production systems, it's been there forever. It's been studied extensively. For example, on the left side, you see a cover crop growing with corn production system. Either it's grown with the crop, or it's grown as a rotation, where it's been grown in the fallow period between the crops and things like that. Also, the scaling, cover crops could be grown in very large acres. At the same time, it could be grown in small kitchen beds or small vegetable beds, such as on the right side, you can see some buckwheat growing in vegetable beds in small pepper bed or something like that. So cover crops has been there. I mean, it's not reinventing the wheel or anything, but it's been used, it's been extensively studied, and the benefits has been documented. But for citrus, it's new. It's an emerging practice in production, especially with the leadership of Dr. Strauss and scientists like that. We're trying to implement or encourage growers to utilize this as a tool for several benefits in citrus production system into the and here's a picture of cover crop mix planted in citrus row middles. So I'm not going to go into detail again, but Dr. Strauss already mentioned that there are several benefits, including building soil health and quality, retaining erosion, soil erosion, especially if you have that in the row middle. Then my concentration here is, or my focus is, how this could be a great tool for our weed management toolbox, how this can suppress weed growth. So we have been doing several projects with our team, and most of the studies results are encouraging. But I would like to say cover crops actually in citrus, not only in citrus, any tree production system, for example, peach orchards or apple orchards, wherever you have a tree row system, it's a great tool, and it's a weed control tool that's provided by the Mother Nature, actually. I'm a big fan of this after seeing documenting all the results from the cover crop, especially on weed suppression. So let's see how these cover crops are controlling the weeds. Okay, so shade. The key word here is shade. Again, we heard from the previous presentation, having a good dense flush vegetation of cover crops gives a lot of cool, makes the soil cool. Not only keep it cool, the shade is a natural weed killer. I mean, just remember, think about this. If you are working in the field of weed science, you know that the soil is an enhanced seed bank for the weed seeds. For instance, top 4 to 5 inches of the soil in Florida, it's filled with weed seeds that can actually germinate for up to 20 years or so. So any time of the year, any season, these weeds can come up. And it is a very big issue in citrus, because citrus, you're kind of spoon feeding the trees these days with a lot of irrigation and nutrition and things like that. So it's a field day for the weeds that can come up. But having cover crops in the row middles or in the citrus orchard floors, what it does is it's going to provide a lot of shade, and the shade is not conducive for these weed seeds to germinate. So this keeps the light out and helps in weed suppression. So shade is actually, this is a picture of a shaded area from a radish canopy. The daikon radish is a cover crop that we use a lot, or we have found very successful in our evaluation. So if you have a very lush growth of radish, you can see a lot of seed in the shade in the soil, and it's going to prevent a lot of germination from them. And another mechanism is allelopathy. I mean, some of you already heard about it or know about it. So basically, it's a process of releasing some biochemicals such as phenolic acids or other coumarins, and a lot of compounds releasing into the soil, underground or above ground, and which is going to impact the growth of other vegetation, surrounding vegetation or neighboring plants. For example, this has been documented a lot, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but I just want to say this is one of the mechanisms that cover crop utilize to suppress the weed growth. There are some great reviews out there. Allelopathy for weed management is available online if you want to know more about the compounds and things like that. But I want to say some of the cover crops such as rye, sunflower, and sorghum have been extensively studied for their properties of allelopathy. But again, these allelochemicals does a great job staying in the soil and impacting the growth of other weed species surrounding them. So that's another mechanism. So again, there may be other mechanisms, but mostly when you think about cover crops, or at least in our observation, when you have a cover crop in the tree row middle system, allelopathy and shade and the competition with the weeds, I mean, these cover crops make sure other vegetation is not, or such as weeds, are not germinating in the neighborhood. So I'm going to now talk about a little bit about the trials we have done. So we've been doing a 3-year study where and mostly in our observations, we show that the cover crops in the row meadows generally reduce the weed pressure, as you can see from this piece of data. So we have on the y-axis a number of weeds per square meter, and we have several treatments such as no cover crop, then legume cover crop, and a cover crop mixed with non-legume. But generally, when you compare to the no cover crop treatments, you can see in most cases and most evaluation timings, in both locations, we have done this in 2 locations, and in both timings, several timings and locations, we can see compared to the no cover crop, the number of weeds per square meter, weed density is very low, meaning there was an effective suppression of the weeds. Then, if you look at mostly, generally the observation is like, it has been suppressed when there was a cover crop, if it's a legume or non-legume. And again, another piece of data I want to show, there was about, if you look at the percentage reduction, there was about 80% reduction in weeds and density when compared to the cover crop and non-cover crop, because here you have different mixes here, and the cover crop mixed with eco-mowing. Eco-mowing is a process where you cut the cover crop clippings from the row middle, and you deposit it under the tree row, so that you are adding a little bit of organic matter there. But again, if you look at this piece of data, when you compare to the control or standard grower practice of keeping the regular vegetation, whatever is there, having a cover crop suppress the weeds up to 80%. So if you think about some of the weeds that's been suppressed in our studies, it includes a whole suite of all problematic and troublesome weeds, such as guinea grass. As you can see here, it's a very problematic weed in Florida. In citrus, and it can actually grow with the trees. Like in the tree rows, it will get entangled with the trees, and it sucks up a lot of nutrients and moisture from the soil that should be available for the trees. Virginia pepperweed, ragweed parthenium is a very troublesome weed because it's resistant or tolerant to many herbicide programs. So having that weeds under check is a great benefit for citrus growers. Nightshade also, it's a weed in several horticulture production system, and it's been documented as tolerant and resistant to several herbicides. Sedges and crabgrass, all these nasty weeds are controlled by the integrating the cover cropping into our row middle vegetation management system. So one of the things that we observed from this study, the density of the cover crop has a lot to do with the weed suppression ability. For example, you can see a piece of data here. You have a cover crop per square meter, the density of the cover crop, and weeds per square meter. And consistently, if you have a higher cover crop per square meter, there is a reduction in the weeds. And this is supportive of what I was telling before. Yes, the shade, if you have a lush, dense growth of cover crop with a good density, it's going to suppress the weeds emergence. So there will be less weeds. So we have to select a cover crop in such a way it's going to give you good canopy. At the same time, it has a good lush vegetation. We have to ensure that in terms of irrigation and things like that. That's very important. So at least from a weed science point of view, a density of the cover crop really matters when it comes to weed suppression. Again, this is a data I want to show where we have the cover crop germination density trend. If you look at the legume and non-legume, so I mentioned that in our studies we use a mixture of cover crops. Dr. Strauss also mentioned that, so it includes legume such as cowpea and things like that, and non-legumes as well. But generally there was no trend, but at least you can see the density. Sometimes the legumes take over, sometimes the non-legumes take over. But generally, I would say we found that a mixture with legume always had an advantage of having a good lush vegetation growth. So this is a picture from our study. So there's a cover crop area on the left. That's our daikon radish, one of the successful cover crop we see in our trials, and just dry daikon radish there. But if you look at the other quadrat, where there is a non-cover crop area, you see a lot of weeds coming up there. All the nasty weeds such as guinea grass, black nightshade, geranium, all troublesome weeds in citrus. So again, having cover crop, having a good dense growth, lush vegetation, a good canopy closure can be a great tool in suppressing the weed seeds from the soil. So if you think about, if I want to talk a little bit about daikon radish here, because it's just what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. If you pull out the daikon radish as here, it's really deep. It's one of those cover crop that can grow and establish pretty easily, and it within a couple of months you can see the roots can extend more up to 3 to 4 feet, and so. Not only it is helping to come up with a good vegetation or canopy closure, it's going to help the soil to stay in place as well because of their extensive biomass that's formed underground as well, which is also very important. So this type of cover crops, it's easy to establish, as well as it can really do the job in terms of weed suppression as well as managing the soil erosion. Another thing, there is an emerging, or there is a concept of biofumigation, because I talked about the allylochemicals and allelopathy, right? So one of the example of an allylochemical is gluconsinolates. They're a group of compounds that's been released by the plants from the mustard family, Brassicaceae, and daikon radish happen to be one of the member of this family. So there are studies that documents the release of gluconsinolates from daikon radish and other mustard family plants into the soil. So it's kind of a fumigant. So what I'm gonna come up here, it's not only actually suppressing the weed seeds, but also it can have potential pest management efforts as well. Like, for example, these are some of the compounds that can actually suppress or thwart away nematodes population. So that's a concept that we have to try whether it's an additional benefit then, right? If you utilize cover crops from the mustard family, such as daikon radish, that might be a possible scenario of some nematode and soil-borne pathogen controls as well, which has to be, we have to actually definitely try it in the future. But there is a concept out there. And again, this is a picture of daikon radish, and you can see the lush vegetation and growth in the quadrat here. So another observation we made from these studies, these cover crops, yeah, it's going to suppress the weeds, but it increases the composition or enhances the density, or what do you call that diversity in the raw materials. For example, I want to show a small piece of data. With cover crops on the right side, on the left side, you can see basically it's more than 80% cover crops, but then you see some broadleaves plants such as Virginia pepper, Parthenium, Panicum, all those. So it's more diverse in nature there. But when you compare to the regular grower standard practice, where there is no cover crop, but they generally keep whatever vegetation is coming up in the raw material, it's basically this yellow. More than 90% is sedges actually, or some grasses. There is very less broadleaves there. So the point I'm gonna get here is, when you think about a weed, I would prefer having grasses in my grow. I'm sorry, I would prefer having a broadleaf weed in my grow than grasses, because I want to show these two root systems of two weeds, such as grasses, guinea grass, and broadleaf. So some of the observations from our group shows that grasses are much a higher competitor. Grasses is going to provide a greater competition with the citrus compared to broadleaves, especially most of the broadleaf weeds we have in citrus are annual in nature with a fibrous root system, whereas grasses are perennial in nature, such as Guinea grass or Johnson grass and things like that, which have very extensive root system. So the water, moisture, sucking potential of these grasses are much higher than broadleaf. I'm not saying these broadleaf weeds are, I mean, they are nasty as well. They have to go, but when compared to when you think about like a weed ecologist, when you think about the density of composition of weeds in your grow, I would say having broadleaves may be relatively beneficial than having grasses, especially in terms of competition. So having the cover crops, actually, because of their peculiar nature and this competition ability, they try to, even if the weeds are coming, it's mostly broadleaf weeds compared to the grasses. They have an excellent suppression potential for grasses such as greeny grass. So I want to bring your attention back to this, the slide I showed in the beginning, right? The row middle vegetation, very important. If you don't manage it very well, it's gonna impact your tree row. I have a piece of data to support that that hypothesis. See, this is another study we have done. We are currently doing where we are looking at the cover crop in the row middle with some practices, chemical management practices under the tree. For example, we have the weed densities here. You have a cover crop plus an alternative herbicide, it's glufosinate here, cover crop plus glyphosate, and the control were standard grower practice. No cover crop, whatever is coming, mowing and managing it, and with herbicides under the tree. So this is a piece of data from Guinea grass. You can see the Guinea grass growing in the tree row here, neck and neck with the citrus trees. But if you look at here, with the cover crop, the under trees, the Guinea grass density is very low. But without cover crop in control, you can see the Guinea grass infestation. Even with the herbicide program, it is not under control. So meaning, having cover crops in the row middles, it's not only a benefit for the row middle or weed suppression or vegetation management in the row middle, but it goes a long way, right? It's going to help you to reduce the weed pressure in the under tree areas as well, which is going to help reduce the chemical footprint as well as reduce the chemical application in the under tree areas for the growers. So seed bank. You know, as a weed scientist, this is something really, really excited me because seeds, the weeds are real tough fighters. So what they does, they're opportunistic. So whenever they emerge, they provide they produce a lot of seeds, and they're going to add these seeds to the soil, which is known as seed bank. For example, some of these weeds such as black nightshade, amaranth, or pigweed, Guinea grass, all nasty weeds for horticulture production in Florida. These are now some number of the weed seeds they can produce, per season and add to the soil. And research suggests that about 20% of the seeds that they produce in a season can actually germinate as a new seedling immediately in the next season. Meaning, this seed, the soil, is enriched with that seed bank, especially if you have these heavy seed setters. So there comes the long-term weed management perspectives with cover crops. For example, if you look at this piece of data, weed density on y-axis, again, cover crop mixes with legumes and without legumes, you can see the more you plant, the more it's you season. If you have cover crops like first planting, second planting, third planting, that suppression is getting better and better, meaning, you know, they are kind of suppressing that weed to emerge from the soil. As a result, less seeds are produced, and as a result, the seed bank is getting depleted. So you may not see the effect of this cover crop today or tomorrow, but if you keep on doing that, if you keep acclimatize that system, you're going to see better benefits in the long run. So, I'm sure you're going to hear this from other my colleagues from this session, this AST as well. You're not going to see this effect today, but don't worry, you're going to see everything, all the benefits, including weed suppression over due course of time. Especially when you think about a weed suppression, it has a great impact on depleting the seed bank in the soil, which is very important for weed suppression in a perennial crop production such as citrus. So apart from that, we have talked about all the other benefits, or you're going to hear about that from my colleagues, but I just want to show an important benefit, which is basically attract, most of these cover crops that we can utilize in horticulture production, such as sunhemp or radish, they produce beautiful flowers that's going to attract a lot of insects and pollinators, and most of them they secrete sugary syrups. Again, this is a picture of a ladybug beetle, which is a great natural enemy for a lot of pests, including aphids. So, there are a plethora of benefits, not only weed suppression or soil quality, but you can also nurture natural enemies, enhance the growth of natural enemies as well for controlling as a biocontrol means for the pest and diseases. Additionally, if you have a cover crop in your row middle, you don't have to mow it. Otherwise, the natural or the standard grower practice is to mow the row middles, and it takes time, it takes energy, it takes fossil fuels. But having a cover crop, you can considerably reduce the number of mowing and frequency of the mowing and reduce the chemical footprint in the grows. And I'm sure the economic aspects of this will be covered in Dr. Wade's and his team's presentation. Dr. Strauss already mentioned about it, but there is a great resource out there. There is a EDIS article also where they have listing several cover crops, particularly for Florida and South Florida. So I'm going to show some of the annual winter cover crops here, summer cover crops, and perennial cover crops. And this document is very cool because they have the planting times, as well as they have all the details on the seeding rate and things like that. So this could be a great resource for you when you want to interact with your clientele on some of these questions. I'm going to show some examples here: rye, grass, and oats. As I said, rye is one of those grass cover crop that has immense potential for releasing allelochemicals. And they have excellent root system, which is going to prevent erosions and hold the soil. Daikon radish we got good results from daikon radish, especially as a great weed suppressor because of the amount of shade that's going to provide. And buckwheat is also a great cover crop, and it supports a lot of pollinators and beneficial insects. Sun hemp, again, a great cover crop. Apart from that, we talked about cowpea, perennial peanuts, and everything. Crimson clover is another example, and that has been documented to do very well in Florida conditions. So before wrapping up, I like to bring this message to the table as well: terminating the cover crop, which is very crucial because we don't want to convert our cover crop into a weed for the future, right? So timely termination is crucial. Otherwise, there are going to be weed issues. I mean, I have seen several cases where if you don't terminate the cover crop in the right way, in the right time, it's going to become a problem, a pesky weed in the future. So the key rule here is to terminate and incorporate them, before seeding. So usually a mechanical incorporation is being practiced a lot. For example, a roller crimper is a great device that has been used. Not in citrus these days, but I have worked a little bit of cover crop work with row crops in my past. So we use a lot of roller crimper. Basically, it's a drum with a lot of serrated edges where you can cut it and you can make a mat of the cover crop by termination. So this is very important because if you get a good mat of cover crop while during termination, it's actually turning it into a residue, into a mulch, a good carpet or good mulch of cover crops there is very important in suppressing the weeds. Mowing is being used, especially in citrus. I think mowing is a great practice. Tillage is there, but at the same time, it may not be beneficial, especially when you till the cover crops. You get a good incorporation there, but you may not get a good mulch type residue cannot be converted into good mulch, which may not be great from the point of a weed suppression. And chemical, if you utilize chemicals such as glyphosate, or if you combine this with mowing and other techniques, it's a great practice as well. But again, whatever practice you do, we have to make sure make sure that your clients are incorporating and terminating it in the right time, that is before seeding. So that's all I got. I think I'm good on the timing here, maybe a couple of minutes over. But anyway, we talked about weed suppression. So that's a great tool for weed suppression. A density during the establishment is very important. A good dense cover crops can actually suppress the weeds very nicely. And weed seed bank is something that we have to keep in mind when we talk to the growers and the clientele about the cover crops. Again, they may not be seeing the results today or tomorrow, but it's a great system for a long-term sustainable weed management, especially with their impacts on the seed bank. So again, as always, we say with cover crops, it takes time. So patience is the key. We are also doing a lot of studies in vegetables as well, where we try. Vegetables is a seasonal crop, so we try it in the summer, and as a fallow weed management tool. So you can see an example where we have a fallow summer cover crop, and with summer cover crop, we have less weeds in the row middles, meaning it's suppressing the weed growth, suppressing the weed seed germination, and suppressing or reducing the weed seed bank. And tomato without summer cover crop, it's an example where you see a lot of weeds in the row middle. Just want to show that it's been a system that's not only in tree crops, but it can be also tried in vegetable crops as well. With that, I want to thank my student Mural, who did most of the work and analyzed the data, and our team and the collaborators and the funding agencies. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have time, I will take questions. Otherwise, I'll hang around.
Unfortunately, you don't have time.
Okay, I get that.
Please hang around, but we do have interesting anecdotes in the chat. So I am the next presenter.
Yeah.
And I don't know who. I'm willing to be policed by others. I'm going to see if I can share my screen over Ramdas. All right. And thank you very much for that, Ramdas and Sarah. I mean, I learned a lot. I thought I knew quite a bit, but as this, learning a lot. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. And I will do my best because like the other speakers, there's a lot to share. Good morning again. I'm Tara, the natural resource economist at SWFREC. And I explained before my interest in cover crops. I think one area that adoption could really be increased and where cover crops could really do the most benefit in Florida, all the varied production systems that we have is in tree systems, because they seem to allow for cover crops to really behave the way they would naturally. You don't have to worry about tilling stuff in and disturbing the soils. So I think there's a lot of potential to increase adoption, and therefore the benefits that we've been hearing about and we'll hear more about from Davie is in the use in tree crops. So we heard a lot about cover crops management and soil details and benefits in weed suppression. We're going to change gears now and give you a break from all the heavy science and talk more about costs and benefits. And the hope I have is to leave you with some thoughts and maybe even some tools that you can use for yourself or when you talk to growers who are considering adopting cover crops. And this is work that I do with Shourish, who is also on the line. All right. Okay. So cover crops are widely used in row crop production, but we really know very little about its cost and benefits in tree crops. We know that simply not mowing has its own benefits. So keeping the ground covered, not disturbing the soil is important to generating soil organic matter. Sorry, admitting someone. It's important to generating soil organic matter. We know that cover crops has a lot of benefits. We've heard about many of them, but there's also reducing soil erosion, reducing leaching, and increasing nitrogen, which we'll hear about later. Tons and tons of very practical, very real benefits that you can see in the soil from cover crops. But if cover crops are so great, then why aren't more people adopting them? There are several barriers and concerns about cover crops adoption. Particularly the initial costs, the long payback period. And I will talk about this some too. It doesn't matter how many times the other presenters said it, it needs to be driven home. It takes time when you're talking about cover crops. This is a real investment in time and money. So it needs to be very clear to people who are thinking about the practice. And even initially, like what cover crops do you choose? What's the variety choice? You know, which cover crop mix is going to give you what you need. So there's a lot of concerns around cover crops too. Ramdas just mentioned cover crops turning into weeds. You know, growers having another thing to manage. Grass, they can handle. Now you're talking about seed mixes and where are you going to get this from, and planting during the rainy season, and, you know, things like this that growers are thinking about, and they really don't need anything else to think about. So this is work that was motivated by the need to assess cover crops' impact in citrus practices. We worked with the team that you're seeing today and with growers to get a better understanding of growers' attitudes towards cover crops and their costs and benefits. But the principles that we'll talk about today are not just for citrus. We're sharing them here because they should apply to most tree crop systems. We want to know if cover crops are a viable way to increase soil health and therefore improve yields in tree production. So to start, we want to calculate costs and benefits. Cover crops management and costs are going to vary by production system. So some growers will plant from trunk to trunk, some will only plant cover crops in the row middles, and some may choose different crop mixes. All of these things will affect costs and benefits, and there's no one size fits all. Different aspects of your farm management practices as well, you know, differently from what you're doing for cover crops, may also affect the synergies and therefore the costs related to cover crop adoption. So some things everyone who is considering adoption should do is keep records. It's really important to keep records. And a lot of our growers, especially our small growers, don't keep the type of detailed records that you need to truly assess if a practice is good for you. So you want to use a budget if you have one, and try a small plot before adopting. And these are just basic, you know, risk management type of things that everyone should be doing. Keeping records is critical. You can't assess properly if you don't have the numbers. And I know a lot of growers might have the numbers in their heads. No, it's very different in your head than on paper. When you write those things down, they look very different than they do playing around in your head. So keep records. Keep them for multiple years, because we are talking about something that it takes a long time to get benefits. So what we did, Shourish and I, we put together some tools that we would like you to consider using. I will say that they're in the early stages of development. So this is a great group of folks to review these tools for us and see what works for your different production systems or what works for your growers. The idea is that you can use them yourself, or you can use them in conversation with growers, or you can use them directly with growers. They can fill them in to kind of get a sense of whether or not this practice is a good fit for them. Always warn growers that costs are going to increase for the first few years. There's no way around that. It's going to affect cost of production. It's going to show, it may even show negative net benefits, but it's for sure going to affect cost of production in the first few years. So this is the cover crops cost sheet. And what I'm going to show you is it's a 2-page document. I'm going to show you 3 snapshots of this document talking about different components. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this talk, you know, because of time, talking about all the details. We can do that later on, and I welcome you guys to I will send the documents to you and invite you to work with us on, you know, on fine-tuning it. So this sheet includes major cost components for cover crops planting and management. So we're talking about seed price, labor, and time. Labor and time are really very similar concepts. And we divide that time into labor hours and machinery hours, thinking that these are the things that are going to change when you consider cover crop management. So it's really helpful if you have a budget, and then you can just pick out the things out from that budget that will be affected by this new management cost. Things like land prep, your herbicide application, because you may not be using herbicides in the row middles anymore, or at the frequency that you are using them. Machinery costs, you know, if you're using weeding machines or things like that. broadcasting is something that you might be adding, or a no-till drill is something that might be adding. So you want to compare this time, and time is really easy to convert into dollar figures. You know how long that machine is running, and you can get machinery hours. You know how long, what you're paying your employees to do. You know, if you have consultants, what they're charging. So the idea is to get these hours and convert them into dollar figures that we'll talk about later on. So here you can examine changes in labor, machinery related to cover crops use. And I mentioned some of those already, the planting, weed management, if you're using consultants, things like that. So that's what's filled into these different categories here. And you can just jot down they don't need to be precise numbers. It could even be an increase, decrease kind of thing, and estimates of by how much, but just to get everybody thinking about that as they're making that decision. All right, so the other component is easier to understand. It is just the seed cost. That's pretty straightforward. What's your cover crop mix? You want to put in the variety name, the number of applications per year, and that cost, and then you want to total that up. And this is going to vary for everybody. The challenges with seed prices go by market. So they're going to vary over time. Also, seed availability is going to vary over time. So these are some of the things that have to be considered. And the last section of this tool, it asks you to compare those total changes related to cover crops. It's not a full budget. I mean, that would be ideal, but in conversations that might be hard to get to. But you want to compare those changes that are affected by the cover crop use to see how much it's going to affect cost of production. So these are just the sums of the different categories that I showed before, and it's going to show a negative net benefit for the first few years. Growers really need to expect this. Again, this is a long game. They have to be willing to put up that expense. The sheet doesn't ask for a crazy amount of detail like you would in a full budget, but it should give you that sense of, is this something that I want to invest in for multiple years? Is this something that I can afford? Another thing you want to consider is on the benefit sides. The costs we can get at easily enough. Benefits are harder to assess, mainly because we don't have data on yields for several years. It takes multiple years to get the benefits, and then will you even see a yield result? A lot of times the projects that we work on, the grants don't last long enough for us to collect and keep the study going and analyze that type of data. So what you really want to know about, you can't get at through a lot of these studies, but you can play around with scenarios. So ideally, you will have multiple years of data, and what this cost benefits tool, this is a separate document that I'm going to share now. It has some main features. For one, everything in here is hypothetical. I want to be clear on that. We're not talking about real numbers here. We can give some estimates based on what we did for citrus, but because this is very general for all tree crops, we're just trying to give you an idea of how you can use the tool. You're going to create your own cost scenarios and your own yield scenarios. And some of the key features are, you need to have the conventional cost of production. You need to have your cover crop seed management costs, and you need to have some sense of the savings that you will get from cover crops. And there will be some savings, ideally, that you'll get from cover crops. It's just that the savings aren't enough to offset those costs. So it's still a net negative benefit, or loss is I guess how that should be phrased. And break-even prices. So there's some basic analysis at the end that can give you a sense of what price that commodity would have to be to break even. So Shourish, my postdoc, put together an Excel tool. This is a snapshot of that Excel tool for a 10-year scenario. So the example that we have here is Valencia oranges. It's just an example, and this is largely because we have budgets from Ariel Sigerman on this. We have an economist dedicated to citrus, so we have ready citrus budgets. But we'd have to maybe try and get budgets for the other commodities that you guys are considering. The figures in red are the values that have drop-down data. So this is where you can play around with those scenarios. So all of these things in red here, you can move, there's a drop-down menu is hard to capture here. You'll see in the Excel document that you can switch up the numbers some, and you can also type those numbers in if you don't like the options that are provided. So there's a slot to include the average production cost, and that is without cover crops. So you kind of your baseline, and then the rest have to do with cover crop costs. Expected yield information is going to be included. Expected savings from cover crops, which right now is primarily not mowing. So here we have the savings options, and here are whatever your yields might look like. For citrus is boxes per acre or pound solid. For different commodities, this will have to be changed. Total savings then will include reduced mowing cost, which for citrus that mows several times a year, that is, for proper management, you should be mowing several times a year. That's about $103 per acre in savings from not mowing the cover crops for citrus. And then there's a weighted average of savings from reduced fertilizer and herbicide use. We don't have exact numbers about how much herbicide or fertilizer. This is really just in theory that once the cover crops are established and you're getting the benefits, the expectation is that you will reduce your herbicide use and you will reduce your fertilizer use. So this is where, as far as calculating the benefits are concerned, you have to kind of play around, and hopefully insights from this talk can help you to decide what values to change. The weights of the fertilizer and herbicide use in this document are the proportions of their costs without cover crops. So for this scenario, let's say herbicide is 13% reduction and fertilizer is at 22%, something like, or 22% of the cost, and herbicide is 13% of the cost. So the tool calls for, when you look at the savings, it calls for percentages as opposed to actual dollars. And this is something that you guys can comment on if you rather have actual numbers, or if you just want to say, okay, we see about a 5% reduction in herbicide, we see about a 2% reduction in fertilizer, and then you can just plug those in, and it will give you then this break-even analysis year by year. Some of these values are year to year, and some of them are, meaning you can change them just one time, make an assumption for the entire 10 years, or you can go in and change them over time. So here we play around with a 5-year scenario. So I want you to focus on the last column. And because we don't expect much change from year 1 to 4. So we're assuming that you'll begin to see some of these benefits in year 5. And this is assuming. And let us assume a 2% year-to-year inflation rate. Honestly, the way things have been, it's going to be more, but just for scenario purposes, we'll assume a 2-year inflation rate. And let us say we reduce cover crop costs by 10% in year 5. So what you'll notice we've done is cover crops for what we've seen in citrus cost about $248 before you account for the savings. This is, and I'll talk more about what we include in this $248. And with inflation, that's expected to increase over time. But by the time you get to year 5, we're hoping with proper management, you would have gotten that seed bank, so you don't need to purchase as much seeds, or if any, or you have a good handle on your management practices, so you're not putting in as much, your learning curve is a lot less steep or none at all at this point. You're an expert at it. And so the cost of managing your cover crops is going to go down. The idea behind cover crops is in time, once you have things very well established, the cost should not be nearly as much as it was initially. So we have it increasing slightly in the first few years, but by year 5, we're saying if everything goes well, you should start to decrease your, and that's even with the inflation, the costs should start to decrease. So let's say that you actually see a yield increase in year 5, and for argument's sake, 5% yield bump, and a 10% reduction in herbicide costs. You're done with spraying, other than if you wanted to terminate your cover crops or something like that, and a 5% reduction in fertilizer use, because everything, you know, with fertilizer, a lot of time, or nitrogen, a lot of times the thought is more is best, but given the prices, you might want to cut back. And if you don't need it based on, you know, what you have going either from trunk to trunk or in your row middle, that let's just say you cut back on your fertilizer cost, and 5% might be a bit ambitious, but let's say that's what was done. Then your total savings is going to be just about $160 by the time you get to year 5. And this is savings for year 5. It doesn't account for all the costs that you put in the previous years. So that's something that we probably will add to this tool, is kind of assessing at what point do you get a return on all the investments that were made in the prior years. And for this scenario with Valencia oranges, then using this tool, and these are, you know, the basic calculations that we do. You have, it's going to cost about $18 per box to break even in year 5. And that translates to $3.36 per pound solid. So this is just some of the information that you can get from using that tool, but we really do have to have an understanding of how the production practice for the specific crop works, so that we can know how to alter this tool to meet your needs. It's designed to be pretty simple. You can use a drop-down menu and play around with scenarios or plug in your own numbers. But the idea is only the stuff that is in red. The cost stuff, you can change those as well. We're not going to make anything here fixed. We can't, because it needs to be flexible for the different production systems that are being considered. Now, here are some specific values that you can consider when you think about costs and benefits for cover crops. A mix of legumes and non-legumes can be used by the grower. The seed costs assume 50 to 80 pounds of seed are required per acre. This is for if you're doing row middles per application. And this is based on our discussions with growers. So this is a sample, you know, of a seed mix: sun hemp, sunflower, daikon radish, buckwheat. And if you do, say, an average of 65 pounds per acre, you're just under $100 per acre for seed alone. And again, these prices are going to be based on availability, and they're going to be based on the market. So it's also what you're going to choose is going to depend on your need. If you're trying to fix nitrogen, you're going to need a certain type of cover crop. And those legume cover crops, my understanding is they tend to be a little bit more expensive than the non-legume cover crop seeds. If you're trying to manage weeds, then we just saw an example, you know, like daikon radish is something you want to use. If time is an issue, peanuts might not be a great option. We learned from Dr. Strauss earlier on. So there are different objectives. If soil erosion is your objective, then you want something that gives good cover, but maybe also helps to keep the soil together. If you're in a colder part of the state and you're concerned about, you know, cold winters and the soil being too cold, then maybe you don't want something that offers that much shade or leaves too much residue. So there are different things that have to be considered with the seed mix, and that 100% is going to affect the cost. So there are other resources, some online that we found. There's a website with southern states that can give you connections to other seed prices or seed companies throughout the South. Hancock Seed has a nice website that will give you their prices, but they're pretty easily accessible. There is an EDIS document available, Daniel Treadway et al. Talking about, they give a nice list of companies in Florida that you can contact. So I'd encourage you to look at that publication. So what we found for citrus, and like I said, this should apply because we can assess this for the row middles, and most tree crops operate that way, and we can separate the cover crop costs for the most part from other management practices. So we can see what that costs. So if we include that seed cost of about $99 per acre, 2 applications per year, and fuel costs, this is for the machinery that you're going to use probably to plant, go back and forth down the row middles, that's about $2 per acre. Labor, we put on average at $20 per hour. And if you're going to use a no-till drill, a daily rental is about $250 we're learning, which works out to about $15 per acre per application. And then we include this $5 cost. And you can think of this as made like a buffer, really, or the cost of the learning curve. There are things that are going to happen that you don't expect, especially in the early years of adopting. And because it's new to most people to most tree growers who are using it. So you may find that seeds don't germinate like you wanted to. Then you have to go purchase more seeds. Or you're having an issue with your no-till drill, or you miss the poor timing with planting. Lots of little things. We all know all the things that can happen on a farm. So this we sum up as like a $5 per acre application for these unforeseen or unplanned events that might be happening. So for citrus, we know that the mowing is about $103 per acre. That is our savings. So the net for cover crops, when you take that from the total cost, cover crops will cost you, and we're not, like I said, we don't have numbers for reductions in fertilizer or herbicide use. So these are real values that we could get from field experiments. The net is going to cost you just over $145 per acre. So that's expensive. An additional $145 per acre, and you don't see the benefits for 5 or more years, is really expensive. So we know that cover crops have environmental or public benefits, and there are federal and state agencies that will offer partial payments for cover crops use. One big one, and one that is easy to find information about, is the NRCS programs. And that is EQIP CSP offers funding for cover crops. I also thought it was important to note, cover crops is a climate smart practice. So anybody interested in carbon sequestration type practices, NRCS has a big push on this now, and there's a lot of grant funding around this. There's going to be a lot of, I'd imagine what is to come is a lot of payments to growers, or opportunities for growers to sign up for payments related to climate smart agriculture. So as there's this push from the US government for climate smart agriculture, I think there'll be opportunities to get funding for those who are interested in cover crops. Other places that offer funding, that I'm sure offer funding, but it wasn't so easy to get the details, are FDACs and water management districts. So maybe you're going to have to contact your local people there to find out how their cost share program works and how it works, particularly around cover crop use. Cover crops are, because it is a climate smart practice, it is eligible for carbon markets, but we do not have access to carbon markets for Florida soils yet. So no idea when that will change, but when it does, using cover crops should be attractive for that as well. NRCS right now doesn't stop you from getting payments from carbon markets. So it is possible to be involved in the carbon market and get an NRCS payment. But to talk about that in any more detail, we'll need a whole other session. So I'm going to leave the carbon markets alone now and just say maybe that's something to consider in the future. So as far as NRCS, there's a lot of information on this slide. Here is the process for enrolling in the NRCS programs. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. This information was gathered through discussions with our local NRCS conservationist. First, the grower needs to assess why he's adopting cover crops. Then NRCS is going to have a planning process that includes the grower. They're going to try and capture the grower's needs, which might be anything from nitrogen fixation, soil erosion, increasing soil organic matter, or weed control. And they're going to try and capture those growers' costs and their timelines. How the payments will be made is going to be established. And one important note is that partial enrollment is an option. So this is good for those who just want to try it. Now, there are trade-offs with everything. NRCS and a lot of these conservation programs require a lot of paperwork. Getting in touch with your local agent, maybe they can help the growers navigate the enrollment process. But it's good to try the cover crops, try it on a small portion of your farm before you fully commit. And it's good to have an agency or agencies that will offer funding or partial funding for those trials. But the trade-off is getting funding for cover crops on a small plot going to be worth the paperwork. That I couldn't tell you. So it's another one of those barriers to adoption that wasn't mentioned before, but is typically mentioned in the agricultural literature, is everything that's involved in enrolling for these programs. Now, this is happening in Florida. Tree crop growers are getting paid for using cover crops. There is a mango grower in Pine Island who is enrolled in EQIP. So this is possible, and people are taking advantage. Also in California, there are several citrus growers in NRCS cost share programs for adopting cover crops. Slides are a little slow to move. All right, so just some resources, and I'm not going to spend much time here. This information came from our local NRCS folks. We have an office in Fort Myers, and then here's contact information for the state agronomist. There are also some other resources that NRCS offers online that are pretty easy to find. So they have different working groups. So maybe you can target a specific working group in your area. They're divided like a multi-county working group, and there's a plant materials center that can be helpful. NRCS also offers different scenarios that can help walk you through cover crops, like EQIPs. Then they have these different payment schedules, different scenarios that are specific to Florida. They're not specific to tree crops. They primarily, from what I could tell, deal with row crops, but maybe some inferences can be made. So the last thing I want to touch on, I'm not sure how I am doing with time, but the last thing I want to touch on, and I'll go through this very quickly. We did survey citrus growers as a part of this grant to kind of get at their attitudes towards cover crop use. We got a total of 59 growers in Florida, just under 180,000 acres. And what we learned that I think might be useful for you in your discussion with growers, most growers, whether they use cover crops or not, they rank the nutrient retention in soil as the #1 attribute. So they are very much, they're convinced somehow, even though they're not adopting, that yes, cover crops are good for nutrient retention, and that is the #1 benefit they'll consider. In keeping with that, the ones who used cover crops, about 24 of that 59 used cover crops, 58% said absolutely they saw improvements in soil health because of the cover crops. And the other thing that I want you to consider, most people, 62% of those who used cover crops also had a no-till drill. And the vast majority of those who did not use cover crops also did not have a no-till planter. So this does not tell us what came first. If they had the no-till planter, so they just went ahead and said, okay, we'll adopt cover crops, or if they chose to adopt cover crops, so invested in a no-till planter. We are not sure about what direction that goes in. But in talking to some growers and through the interview process with some of the surveys, we did learn while broadcasting is an option, people had a lot more success if they used a no-till planter. All right, so in summary, cover crops can be a valuable addition to perennial fruit production systems, and cover crops can be profitable depending on the savings and effective management practices. It does take time. Savings takes time to accrue, but it can happen. You can still see a profit using cover crops in the early years. It just might not be the profits that you had before. It's not that your entire production system may see a loss, but it is going to cost you some. The majority of cover crop adopters have seen improvements in soil health. Cost share programs are available, and this is taking place in Florida. So I'd like to thank Shourish. Please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to acknowledge our CRDF funding, also to acknowledge the team that's presenting here for their inputs and their contributions to this work. I don't think I left time for questions. I think I might be a bad actor.
You have some 5 minutes.
Oh, I have to. Oh, thank you. Well, then I have
It
time.
depends on if we're taking a break, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you're
So
break,
I think maybe we should take a break. It's a lot to digest, and for those who had questions and they didn't get to ask those questions, so I would ask the speakers to stay, to maybe sip your water and have your coffee at the screen. But everyone else, how about we take, I think our break is due to end already. So can we meet back here at 11:05?
I'm going to run to the restroom real quick, but I'll be right back.
All right, thank you. All right, see everyone at 11:05.
Dr. Wade, I'm going to pause the recording until you guys come back, okay?
You read my mind. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Let's go straight into Davie.
Thank you, Tara. Let me see if I can share my slides. Can you see my slides?
We see the slides like with notes and those things, and you're on the acknowledgements.
Oh,
presenter view.
Okay. How about that?
It's still the same. You might want to select a slideshow and go to and do a presentation.
Okay, all right. Let me go. How about that?
No.
It's still the same.
Oh.
There should be a little icon that shows like a projector screen. If you click on that, it changes. It should be at the top. You see, like, if you go all the way up at the top where it says like auto save, and you see there's like a little projector screen, a little rectangle with a.
It's a rectangle. No, I don't see that here.
All the way up on the top.
The top. Is it on the left or right?
From where I'm sitting, it's on the left-hand side.
Oh, okay.
So maybe if you click on where it says slideshow, yeah, okay, there.
Okay.
But I think we can still see your notes
go to
too there.
display settings, go to display settings and switch your monitor.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
At the top, or
Okay, at the top, because I think I
top,
saw
at
one
the top.
at the top. Okay.
It
Yeah,
says
display
display settings.
Display settings.
All the way up.
Keep going, all the way up.
All the way up. I can't go any further.
It's
No,
next to the
says
show taskbar.
Display settings, and slideshow.
Okay.
Next
Next
one,
one
nope.
over.
Display settings.
Oh, okay. This one.
No,
up
you
at
were
the
just
top.
there showing taskbar.
Or task.
Now go, no, next to it, display
Oh, this
settings.
one.
No,
Okay.
the one next to it.
Okay, this one.
No. The
Huh.
one that says display settings.
So if you move your mouse,
Right.
wherever your mouse is now, move it just a little bit over.
Move it over to the right.
The right. Okay.
Yes,
Here.
we don't see your mouse moving, so it's probably.
Yeah, I don't know what, you've got a weird setup there.
Do you mind? I think I will, because I'm using our another screen that I'm zooming on. Can you give me a
Right, but
second?
you have to switch the screens. So there should be a thing up at the top that says display settings.
Also, Davie, unless you have something embarrassing in those notes, you're free to present it like this.
Yeah, it's
If
just,
you like.
it would be easier for us to see it if you could switch it, but.
Yeah, can you give me a sec? Maybe I could get somebody to help me, because I think I'm using a new computer. It's not my computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give me just like a minute.
Well, in the meantime, are there any questions for the rest of the presenters? Or even across the groups, because we have different expertise with us today. Well, since it's quiet, I will go ahead and invite, we initially wanted to have a field component for this talk. And because there was far more interest in the online version than in person, we opted not to have that. But we definitely do welcome you to make arrangements separately to come and visit the cover crop trials. If you're new to cover crops, it really makes such a difference to see, to touch the plants, walk through the groves, get a little bit dirty, or to get sandy, because this is where our crops are grown. So it can really enhance, put it to life, some of the things that we're discussing here today. So feel free to reach out to us. Apart from the slides, our email addresses are in the calendar invitation. So if you go back to the meeting invite, you'll find us in there. And we all work for IFAS. We're really easy to find, regardless. So feel free to reach out to make arrangements. I know some of you are very far, but if you're in the area or want to plan a trip just for that, we can find a way to make it worth your while.
Hooray!
Oh,
right.
finally, the display
Yep.
settings showed up. I don't know why.
All right. Davie is back. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry about that. It didn't show up here. I'm using a new computer for our library, so I'm not using my personal one because my personal one, my office one messes up sometimes. Sorry about that. So is everybody ready? Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so thanks Tara, Sarah, and Ramdas for your background information? I'm good now. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was trying to get some help, but apparently it worked out before I got the help. Yeah, so I will kind of augment what they already talked about. So this makes my work a lot easier, but actually it complements all our efforts. So most of this heavy lifting acknowledge the work of our graduate student, Mira Brewer, that I co-advised with Dr. Kanissery. So most of it was part of her work. And also we had great contributions from Dr. Strauss, especially with the data collection. So I provide the acknowledgements later. And then most of the work also is being reviewed right now. So hopefully we should have it in journals by this October, November, and December. A few articles are coming out. So I will be talking about the cover crop effects and nutrient availability and distribution, but I also added a little section where I talk about the impacts we noticed in root growth also. So just to give you an overview, I'll provide a small introduction just to keep up to speed, but I think my colleagues have already provided very good introduction, so mine will be just a walkover. And then I'll have some data that I will focus on, a little bit of heavy data presentation on what we collected and what we observed. And one thing that Dr. Strauss was right to mention was that sometimes we really need patients to see trends. So bear with us, most of that was not significant, but important for us to learn some lessons on how to manage cover crops in citrus and other tree production systems. And then I'll talk about the trends we observed in the soil nutrient contents and the harvest and food quality variables, but also a little bit of the root health aspects, and then some conclusions. So this is a part that I think we all wanna hear, that why should we use cover crops in citrus? And why should we use cover crops in the first place in any crop production system? So I think the major goal is to build soil health. And that's the theme that Dr. Strauss emphasized. We want to build soil health. We want to make sure we have the right microbial functions, the right soil functions being met just by building the soil to the right abilities using cover crops. And then, of course, you want to provide biodiversity. Entomologists and pathologists have always gone to the mountain to preach how good cover crops help with changing the diversity of the cropping system, agroecology, so they can help in controlling some pests and diseases. And that's something that has been well observed, especially in row cropping systems. But we are yet to understand this in perennial cropping systems. And then more importantly, the cover crops are known to suppress weeds. And this is the theme that Dr. Kanissery emphasized when he had all the information to prove it. So that was very good. And then more importantly, you notice that cover crops can help reduce erosion. So cover crops somehow help provide better retention of soil. And then you are providing better cover with the ground, where maybe the crop is not covering, you have the cover crops, and then they reduce the impact of the raindrops. And that in turn improves soil retention, and then at the same time reduce soil erosion. And then, of course, here's another part that I want also to emphasize on, that some cover crops, especially the leguminous ones, do fix nitrogen. So examples of those that we use include sun hemp and some others like cowpea and several other legumes do fix nitrogen. And I think this is the part that Dr. Strauss also mentioned. And then Dr. Kanissery mentioned also about allelopathy, where you are trying to really release some exudates in the root zone and limit the capacity of weeds to grow. So other cover crops like buckwheat are well known to do that. And then there are some cover crops that have deep root systems. So for example, daikon radish, it might be a good vegetable, but also it's very good at just opening up the soil, improving the soil structure. So these are things that are very hard to quantify, and I'm glad that Dr. Wade is looking at all those dynamics of the costs and benefits, but this is important to know because there are some of these benefits that we can't easily notice, but you see some benefits of improving the soil fertility and also improving soil infiltration. And then one other benefit is nutrient sequestration. So it's well known that cereal cover crops or grasses tend to use up nutrients and retain them in the biomass. So when you terminate them at the end, as Dr. Kanissery mentioned, you end up getting much of those nutrients that were used up return to the soil. So this is another way of improving and building the organic matter, and then improving nutrient availability, and then recycling the nutrients that were in the soil, and then had gone into the cover crops and back to the soil, and then they get available as a mineralized over time, or they're made available to the plant to use up. So those are some of the quick benefits. So what have we learned over the past, I should say, like from 2018, when we had this project supported by CRDF? What did you learn in terms of the nutrient distribution side, the production side, the nutrient accumulation side? What were the lessons? I think the other lessons have been provided in terms of the microbial communities, nutrient cycling, and all that, with suppression, and also the benefits and costs which we went through for the 4 years of the study. Now, I would like to provide that overview of the data we collected. So, in terms of measurements, we had looked at tree growth, so looking at trunk diameters, tree heights, and stem circumferences. And these were mature trees, so they were over 30 years old. So it was kind of frustrating because we thought we would see changes in growth every year, for example, as a result of cover cropping. But apparently we realized for mature trees, that's a no-go zone because they're already established, they're bearing fruit. So I will show you in a moment some of those results, and the canopy size, and kind of area, what were the trends. Yeah, so in a nutshell, we didn't see much difference in the canopy volumes at both groves that we worked in 2019, but also this was common in the subsequent years. But you can see here for October 2018, March 2019, August 2019, August 2020, and sometime 2021. No much difference between the various treatments. So we are comparing. So the blue ones are where we had the legumes, and then the orange lines is where we had the non-legumes, and then the dark lines is where we had the no cover crop. And then in terms of stem circumference, we didn't see much difference in the two groves. There was the northern part and the southern part, or the sides, but in the northern side, we tended to see bigger circumferences with the control, but this is as a result of the way the trees we selected for the study that in terms of the sizes, but there wasn't change over time. So there wasn't change even in the south grove. So it seems in terms of tree size, we didn't see much impact. And this is something that I'll be providing the recommendation that we might have to look at younger trees to be able to make sense out of the growth dynamics, because that's when you can see a better response and active vegetative growth. Something with canopy area, not much change between legume, non-legume, and the controls, but we saw that trend over time from 2018 to 2021. And something for canopy area, or between the, when you looked at the no cover, non-legume, and then legume cover crops in the north and southern grove. So a little bit of difference there, but not significant anyway. We didn't see much, mostly or similar canopy areas. And something when you looked at the, try to do overall evaluation for the study, for the canopy volumes, also not much difference over time. And also something with the stem circumferences. Now we try to look at the tissue samples because we tend to see changes in nutrient distribution, both in the soil, but also in the tissue. So we wanted to collect some tissue samples once a year, and then of course we looked at 4 to 6 mature leaves per tree, and then of course per quadrant, so more or less like 4 quadrants per tree. So leading to about 24 to somewhere around, I should say between 20 to about 24 leaves per tree. And then we're using about 10 trees per plot. And then we use standard methods for analyzing nutrient concentration. So I'll begin with mostly the nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium. So the middle, the left panel is the one for the nitrogen. The middle panel is the one for the phosphorus, and the right panel is the one for calcium. One thing I would like to emphasize here is that we didn't see much difference in the nutrient concentrations in the leaves, except in the south grove or the southern side where we collected data, and mostly for nitrogen and phosphorus. So we saw some differences there in terms of leaf nutrient concentration. So I would like to also mention, I forgot this, at the bottom, so the dark, the grayish panel is the one for the standard no cover crop. The blue one is the one for the legume cover crop, and the orange one is the one for the non-legume cover crop. And so on the left here, that's where we have the nitrogen, the middle is phosphorus, and then the right is calcium. For calcium, there wasn't any changes in terms of calcium concentrations across the two sites that we evaluated. So when we looked at the micronutrient concentrations, no difference between the sites, between the legume cover crops and non-legume cover crops and the controls. So this was quite frustrating because we thought we would see cover crops triggering better micronutrient uptake, because it's known that cover crops tend to elevate availability of manganese and the availability of boron and zinc. So right here, on the left, you have boron, the middle of manganese, and then on the right, you have zinc. But we didn't see any difference between the three. And then we tried to go further and look at the nutrient availability. So we collect some soil samples once a year, every year in August. And then, of course, we randomly picked about 10 trees, and then we're collecting the sample in the middle of the row, in the row middles, and then under the tree canopy. And then we also, when we took samples under the tree canopy, we were getting that about a foot or 30 centimeters from the tree trunk, because that's closer to where the maybe fertilizers applied. And the row middle is slightly further away, about 1 meter or about 3 or 4 feet from the tree trunk. And we're sampling up to about 30 centimeter depth. And then we had about 2 samples per replication. So for nitrogen analysis, we use the standard 2 molar potassium chloride. And then for the macronutrients, IFAS recommends that we use a MERC3 procedure for available nutrients. So for macro, like potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and then magnesium, use MERC3, and also something with the micronutrients like boron, zinc, and manganese. So right there, you can see not much change here. So comparing under canopy, so as you can see on the left panel, it's the ammonium, in the middle panel, it's the nitrate, and on the right panel, it's the phosphorus. And then the upper one is the northern grove, and the bottom panel is the south grove. And one thing we noticed was that there wasn't much change in ammonium, nitrate, and phosphorus under canopy between row middles when we average that over the time of the study. And then the gray bars are the ones for the control. The blue bars are the ones for the legumes, and the orange bars are the ones for the non-legumes. So we didn't see much difference. And then when you looked at the soil phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and of course, and all those macronutrients are repeated calcium. I shouldn't have. I think it should have been. I should have repeated that part, but I repeated. Sorry about that. So one thing you notice. So we have on the left panel, you have the northern grove. The right panel, you have the south grove, and then you have calcium in the top graphs. Then the second panel is the potassium, and then the third panel is magnesium. At the very bottom is the phosphorus. One thing we noticed was that over time, so look at the data from 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, In the South Grove, you could see the trend showing that over time you were seeing a pattern of increasing nutrient availability, calcium, potassium, especially in 2020. Though now we saw some decline in 2021, but somehow we saw that trend. In the Northern Grove, that pattern was a bit fluctuating. But one thing we noticed was that there was some difference, especially on the under canopy and the raw middle. So in the Northern Grove, usually under canopy where the trees received fertilizer, we saw a bump in nutrient availability. But and even in the South Grove, because that's where the growers apply the fertilizer. But then if you keep looking at the trend over time, especially in 2020 and 2021, you see that the raw middle and the under canopy are comparable. So it means somehow the cover crops started releasing some of or improving the availability of some of the macronutrients, especially calcium, and magnesium, and also phosphorus and potassium. So this is where the growers always, when you tell them, okay, we had this amount of soil phosphorus or soil potassium, or we had so much canopy size or so much canopy growth, they all say, how much yield? How much can I make out of this block or out of this practice? And I think that's a question that also Dr. Wade was posing, that how much money do I recover from my investment? So I think this is a part that we also mentioned just once a year, every spring. And there we credit Dr. Strauss and the team in Immokalee for coordinating this, because there was a lot of trees to harvest from, and it wasn't that easy. So we really appreciate this. And then we determined the fruit size, we measured the diameters of the fruits, and then also we determined the fruit quality. And growers want to see the percentages, they want to see the bricks, they want to see the acid, bricks and acid ratio, they want to see the external color, and also the juice color itself, and then the nutrient content of the fruit. So I will share some of these results in a moment. And so here I'm presenting data for 2020 and 2021, but in the South Grove, we couldn't pick fruit in the South Grove in 2020, I think because of the COVID situation at that time. But we were able to pick fruit in the North Grove in both 2020 and 2021. And though we did see differences between the treatments, but the numbers on the acidity looked good. And then when we looked at the total soluble solids, which is what growers would like to see. In terms of pounds per box, so you can see on the left, no differences between treatments, except on the South Grove in 2021, where we saw some kind of very minor differences, but mostly very comparable impacts on juice quality and also total soluble solids in 2020 and 2021. In terms of harvest, because the growers would love to see how many pounds per tree we harvested. I didn't do a conversion of number of boxes per tree or number of boxes per acre, but in terms of fruit weight per tree, we were able to collect somewhere between 200 to 300 pounds per tree, which is roughly between 5 to about 8 boxes per tree. So not a bad number, considering the fact that we are looking at a situation where we are faced with a pandemic endemic serious greening situation. So in 2020, 2021, and 2022, no difference between treatments. So the gray panels are the controls, the blue panels are the legume cover crops, the orange panels are the non-legume cover crops. So one thing we observed was that the trend was quite similar. In the South Grove in 2020, we couldn't pick the fruit because of COVID restrictions. And then 2021, we noticed the differences between fruit yield, but no significant differences between fruit yield in the South Grove. But in 2022, we saw a little bit of a dip in fruit yield, but we couldn't collect from the controls because the grower had already picked the fruit before we harvested. Yeah, but one thing that I want to mention here is that over the time of the study, so from 2019 to 2022, we didn't see differences in fruit yield. And this is a part that I want to emphasize, that I think some of these, and we tend to see this not only with cover crops, but even with nutritional studies, we tend to see somewhere around a lag of sometimes between 18 to 36 months to see a response. So that's one thing that I think we may need multiple years of building the organic matter. Like, for example, there was a time we had this workshop at one of these growers in Leesburg in Central Florida. This grower was able to build organic matter from 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3% to somewhere around 8% organic matter after 8 years of using cover crops. So these are some of the things we are learning, that some of these trends, even yield responses, we might need some time and some patience to be able to see positive impacts. So let me go to the next slide. So another part we tried to evaluate was to look at root growth dynamics. It wasn't the perfect way of measuring, because each time we installed the roots, we learned that hogs can go in there and pass the rhizotomes and break them apart. And then we come and install a new one, and they come and break them apart. So what I'm showing there is what we had installed in 2019, and we tried to collect data as much as we could. So I will show you some lessons that we gathered. And this is a schematic of one of the studies that one of my postdocs did, and I tried to use this. We used a similar kind of setup in this experiment that we did in Southwest Florida. So right here, I'm trying to show the trends that we observed in terms of root growth over time. So here, slight change in terms of the treatments, because I was talking about standard control, and then the legume cover crop, and then the non-legume cover crop. But now in this one, we'll look at all the treatments separately. So we had the C1 was like a legume cover crop, and then the C1M was a legume cover crop, and then some other mixture that we had. And then C2 was a cereal, non-legume. And then the C2 mixture was the one that was also using a cereal and then another mix. And then the blue line, the light blue line is the standard control. So one thing that we observed was that at the very beginning, it was there is data were not making sense at all, because we saw big differences in terms of the root volume, in terms of cubic millimeters. But now over time, as we kept going, you can see that the trends start picking up. The first 2 years, we could see some differences, but after growing the cover crops in the South Grove, you can see that no differences, especially starting from August 2020 and also February 2021. Good comparison between the legume and also non-legume cover crops and also the control. But the control was essentially picking up over time, but we didn't see any differences towards the end. But over time, we saw improvements in the root volumes. The most important part that I noticed was that, especially in 2020, when we did the scanning of the root volumes, we saw a big bump, especially where we had the legume cover crops and also where we had the cereal cover crop. We saw a big impact in terms of root volumes. And then in terms of root length, here it was more pronounced in the legume cover crop. So where we had the legumes, I don't know whether it was because of maybe the ability to fix some nitrogen, then you make that more available, or maybe you release more bioavailable phosphorus, then you make that available. I didn't have a good solid hand on that kind of conclusion. But then this was observed somewhere in 2019, but over time, then we saw that the trends were quite comparable. So another thing to consider that as we measure these variables in terms of root length, then we might have to do more long term, because in some of the work I'm doing, we have been doing like over 1,000 days, so like over 3 years, over 4 years, then we are able to narrow down the differences to see whether it's a specific treatment that's conferring a particular trend in terms of response. So this is something that we'll have to consider going forward. Now, at this point, I would like to wrap up by saying that it was kind of frustrating that after maybe 4 years of work, or I should say 3.5 years of work, and then over 7 to 8 seasons of growing cover crops, we didn't see any changes in production. So kind of area, kind of volume, system circumference, and leaf nutrient concentration, couldn't observe that. Something that other researchers have reported in short season crops like corn, cotton, peanut, and then even soybean. Some people in the Midwest, some other scientists have reported very good results, but now these are long-term tree perennial crops that we might need some time. And this was the part that was something that we have to consider going forward. And then we also noticed that there was some changes in production due to cover crop in the perennial cropping systems, especially knowing that it might take more than 3 years to be able to see a response. So, for example, some of the root variables show that roots did better after some time of measurement, like after 2 years. The soil nutrient availability was better after 2 years. So all that like in 3rd or 4th year. So this means that if you want to see changes with cover crops, you may need to take this long shot of waiting for a couple of years to start getting the benefits. And then, of course, this is another important part, that root growth trends showed greater root length and volume in the legume cover crop systems over cereal-based systems. This is something that we observed, and even over the control. So legumes tended to do better, but I think there was a question in the groups that how do we handle the cereals? But I think the cereal cover crops also are good because they tend to help with changing the agroecology, helping manage weeds, and also helping manage pests. So I think it's something to consider also. So if you really want to build the nutrient capital, I always go for mostly legume crops. But if you want to make sure you provide a better diversity in the agroecology, then you can always add the cereal-based cover crops. That way you are able to provide a benefit not on the agroecology, but also on the nutrient retention aspect and cycling. So considering some of the gaps that we observed, especially where we couldn't see response in the short term, this is a part that I want to share with you, that we might need to do further studies to understand root growth and water dynamics, especially in citrus cropping systems and other tree cropping systems, and observe the impact of yield and fruit quality over time. Because what we have noticed is that, for example, where we installed the rhizotones, every 6 or 7 months, we try to go to collect data. You see that wild animals, raccoons and all that have gone and busted all those equipment. So good to secure those equipments, and then we can do a better observation and then do this over time. Another part that I also think we should think about is to do further investigation on young non-bearing trees versus the mature trees. This study we did on about 30-plus-year-old trees, which was good because growers want to work with mature trees. But we realized that we might, and I think I'm glad because Dr. Strauss mentioned other studies going on right now on younger trees. Yeah, so this information is important because we can provide ways for our growers to adjust cover cropping practices and extrapolate this for the young plantings, and then they can adjust that accordingly compared to the mature plantings that have bigger canopy, bigger under canopy area compared to the younger trees. And then another thing that we learned also was that we need to further test more cover crop species in the flatwoods, in the southeast, like in Fort Pierce area, or in southwest, like in Mokari area, and then of course the central ridge, to identify agroecological trend and the establishment of cover crops, because it seems to be a nightmare also in terms of just getting the cover crop established. It's sometimes to apply additional water, or sometimes to check the weather and make sure you are plant when we are getting enough rain. So these are things that we should keep tweaking and find the better timeline of planting the cover crops. And at this point, I would like to express my sincere gratitude. My colleagues have also done the same to the Citrus Research and Development Foundation for funding this study that was led by Dr. Strauss. And also in a special way, my thanks to Dr. Strauss, Dr. Kanissery, and Dr. Wade for their wonderful collaboration and their lab teams, especially where my team couldn't make it to Mokala, especially with the harvest. Their teams could coordinate all the activities down there. And sometimes even soil sampling, their teams could coordinate all that. So I really appreciate that. And then I had a few postdocs from my lab that supported this work. And I really appreciate their inputs. And then some graduate students helped with the fieldwork, but primarily Dr. Brewer. She just completed her PhD in May. She did most of this work and as part of her dissertation. So I'm really indebted to her efforts. And then MS students also who worked in my program during that time, and I'd like to thank them all. And I'll be happy to take any questions or comments if there is any. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Davie. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ramdas. I enjoyed those talks. I hope everyone else did. Please feel free to engage now, ask questions. In the chat, you will notice the evaluation link. Please let me know if you cannot access it. So we reserve this time to kind of close things off and for you to take this time to complete the evaluation. It's a very short survey, and this is a group that knows all too well the value of it to us. So I'm going to ask that you take 2 minutes and fill this out. Monchi has a note, the end product for growers, fruits and yield quality. Yeah. So Davie, what's your takeaway on that? Because I think that all stops with you and, you know, what you were talking about in your presentation, you know, like how long will it take to see any kind of yield difference?
Yeah, that's a hard one. This is a part I struggle with. Because I had thought when we did this, because we did multiple, and we did a good job because we did 2 cover crop seasons per year for about 4 years. And then we did see changes in fruit yield or quality over that 4 years. Yeah, so to answer your question, Monji, I would say, I think 4 years is not good enough either. So you might need to go a little bit further. I'm suspecting because this grower showed me that he was able to build, you know, a better organic matter, a better response in about 7 to 8 years. I'm anticipating for mature growth, you might need that kind of timeline. But if you have young bearing trees, I think the story might be different because young bearing trees are still actively growing. And then if you change the agroecology, you change the microbial communities, you change the nutrient cycling abilities of that soil, you might see that response maybe sooner. That's my prediction, because you tend to see a better response for younger trees than mature trees.
I would just add to that. So, I mean, the trees that we did that CRDF study were the groves that were given to us by the commercial grower. Those trees were, you know, 35, 40 years old. So we have trials now on trees that are 8 years old, 6 years old, and then we just started a trial at SWFREC on trees that were planted in April. So we'll have a wider range of tree ages to start looking at. So, and some of the groves that we've been doing cover crop trials and have now all been injected. So that will also be interesting to see what kind of relationship there is between those 2 different treatments.
So is that a part of this trial, you know, being these separate groups, will you be able to separate the cover crop effects from the OTC? This is
no, unfortunately, I've got 2 trials where the grower said, oh, whoops, we injected all your trees after the fact. So at least they're all injected, so we can look at injected with and without cover crops, but we won't have other than previous years data.
Yeah, so that still doesn't answer Manji's question, really. Like the cover crop effect is still going to be hard to tease out.
Yes.
yeah, there are several challenges when dealing with tree crops, and with a practice that takes such a long time to see the benefits. So any other thoughts? I think Mark is heading out. Thank you, Mark, for your attention. Thank you for participating. And thanks to everyone else as well. As a follow-up, I will send all the presenters have agreed to share their slides. So once the Zoom link, the recording for the Zoom becomes available, we will collect all the slides, send them to you, and any additional information or presenters want to share, like I'll be sending that those 2 work tools primarily for you guys to review and to give your input. They're drafts, and I think you are the best ones to tell me how useful something like this is. It won't be available online just yet. I really want to hear from you, how to tweak this before making it publicly available. So just keep that in mind. It's not something that we would share widely, but I think this is a small enough group with very focused interests. So your input on those 2 documents will be very valuable to me. All right, we have people heading out, so I'm not sure, but you are welcome to stay to chat now, and our speakers have agreed to stay until 1 o'clock. So if you'd like to stay back and follow up with discussion, questions, things you didn't see in the slides, things that weren't clear, or even to try and make arrangements to come down to Immokalee, this is a great time. You definitely have everybody's attention until 1 o'clock.
Sarah, is there still going to be a 12:30 panel discussion that you want us to hold questions till, or we're just going to get these done now?
I think you can ask now. I think the evaluation should be pretty quick. So yeah, we can go straight into that, and that way I don't eat up everybody's lunchtime.
I'm taking notes. So what's probably the best warm season cover crops for really wet soils? Because I got some growers, and this is not necessarily on the tree crop side, but he does strawberry production, and his soil is a bit heavier, and it's usually fairly prone to flooding. So establishment of a lot of crops can be difficult, and even maintenance, because during the summer months, it definitely gets pretty heavy in there. And I have a few areas in my counties that are on a bit more of a clay loam kind of ridge that also deal with this issue.
So I would say, Matt, I'm not sure that I can directly answer your question right now, because all the stuff that we've been doing with citrus, those are really well drained soils. And it's, the setup is very different. I will say that our new vegetable horticulturist down here, Pavlos, I'm going to butcher his last name, Silvakis, I think is how you say it, is working on some looking a little bit more closely at cover crops for vegetable production. And so having things that can grow during our wet, rainy summer months versus things that grow in different fallow periods. And I'm working with him on some of those things. We just submitted a grant proposal, so fingers crossed on that. But yeah, because that is one of the challenges, is what do you do when it's super, super, super wet? And so I'm not sure that what we've seen so far is going to give you the best information on that, other than give some things a try. So that's my short-ish answer.
Okay. All right. So then another question. So I have several U-pick peach farms in my area. Really, all the peaches are all U-pick. So for growers like that who are interested in doing, potentially using cover crops instead of lawns, what are some good cover crops they could use that could handle a lot of foot traffic?
So for the most part, well, I think the critical part there is that you don't want things that are going to grow super tall, and that's been generally what we've been. The stuff in the summer, sorghum, Sudan grass, millet, sun hemp we've got some trials in younger trees where the cover crops are taller than the trees, which I could imagine makes you pick complicated. So then something that's a little bit lower growing, like cowpea, grows lower, but you have to be careful because it will vine onto your trees. And so you have to sort of keep an eye on that. If that's generally not desired, but again, when we plant it with a mix of millet and stuff, then it just vines around the millet, and so then that works. I would say things like buckwheat are pretty low growing, but it doesn't last very long into the season. Some of the vetches and stuff are lower growing. I think that's more the issue than the trampling. I mean, even when we've had stuff planted in the winter and they start running stuff over it during March for harvest, stuff sort of perks back up to a certain degree. So, I would imagine that some foot traffic should not completely destroy stuff as long as it's been well established.
Okay, and the establishment, because like our peaches in Central Florida, we harvest in May.
Okay, so then in that case, then actually daikon radish doesn't necessarily get super tall, and so that and that's when that has, I can't talk anymore today. That has been our most successful winter cover crop, hands down, always reliable, fantastic germination. And so, then that gives, as Ramdas, I think, showed the pictures that are, these huge radishes below the ground are fantastic for a lot of benefits. So in that case, that should be fine. And those seem to be pretty tolerant of a lot of stuff. Super hardy. So
and they would be fine going, like, planting in the cool season, going through May.
Yeah,
and then
I mean, we plant, so we plant in, end of October, early November, and harvest for a lot of our trials is in March, but we don't, because it's not raining, we're not going to plant until June. And so the radish will hang on. So they'll start to look a little less happy as it gets warmer and drier, but they'll hang on a bit. So
okay, and then at that point, because again, the customers are going to be done by June. I mean, the peaches peter out, but also it's just too hot for them out there.
Nobody wants to go picking.
Right, and at that point, you could, in theory, terminate the daikon and go over something else.
Yep.
Okay.
And sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I just want to also make sure, like, because I've never dealt with daikon before. Is there ever, like, the tuber part? Does it ever really pop up above the soil line?
It can, and so it depends a little bit on your soil. And so if it's super, we've seen some that do. It's not, I wouldn't say every radish pops up, but yeah, there are some. And so yeah, that might be something you have to be careful of as far as a trip hazard if you've got folks wandering through there. I would say if they do, it's yay amount. It's not like the whole radish sticks up. The majority of it will be below ground, but.
So Matt, I was chiming in to add a couple of points to what Sarah mentioned, especially for the vegetable. Your first question was regarding the strawberry, right? Strawberry production. Yeah. So I was involved with a project recently to look at some of the potential cover crops for the fallow period in tomatoes. So we found that sun hemp adapted very quickly in summer, and in our summer here means it's really wet. It's a wet couple of months with a lot of rainfall, and we found sun hemp kind of adapted very well with a good biomass production and good weed suppression. On top of that, we observed a good nematode control as well, because I think sun hemp has this ability to attract has a I think it will provide a non-conducive environment for the nematodes for some reason. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I'm saying I would say for starters, if you're thinking about a vegetable production system in a wet area or wet scenario, cover crop type thingy, sun hemp could be a potential candidate, at least in my observation personally.
Are your soils, do they hold water a lot, or is it just it's a lot
We
of
have a
rain?
very, very low drainage coefficient, meaning
Okay, awesome. That's good to know.
Yeah. And despite the waterlogged situation, it accrued the biomass quickly and kind of had a good fleshy vegetation.
Okay.
Just an observation from my
Yeah.
study.
Okay. And then last, I want to focus particularly on daikon radish. So how do you effectively terminate it? Like, what kind of equipment do you need? And then also, in theory, growing it as a cover crop for its first use, is it still marketable?
We've had somebody here at the center who keeps bugging me about wanting to sell it. I honestly don't know. The ones that we've seen get to be ginormous. And I know nothing at all about marketability of daikon and what sizes are preferable. That said, taking it out of the ground removes that benefit to the soil. So hence that's I don't want to say defeats the purpose, but it does change that. I mean, because the daikon that we plant during the winter season, by the summer, you don't see those radishes anymore. They've completely decomposed.
Okay.
And so that's encouraging. That means there's a really active of microbial community going on there, decomposing that and using those resources. So not to say that you can't, but just
okay. So by the time it would be, you would terminate it, that radish part is gone.
Right.
Essentially.
Yeah. So
Okay.
terminating will usually, they'll start to sort of fizzle and the leaves kind of dry. They don't like heat. So once it starts to get warmer in May, June, they will start to naturally die off because they don't care for those temperatures. And then we'll usually, again, mow. They can get a decent amount of biomass on top. And so then you mow that, and that basically terminates them. Every once in a while, we see, one or two hanging on into the summer that might have come up from a seed bank or something, but they really don't like the heat. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that was all of it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we still have quite a few people online. Any other questions from the group? All right. With that, then I think I think that was the speaker panel. And we can let you guys go early. Did the presenters want to add anything else?
Just thank you guys for listening, and please don't hesitate to email any of us with anything that comes up. I'm always happy to chat about this stuff.
Okay. Mirtha is asking about the survey. Did everyone see the link to the survey? Can you access it from the chat? I'm posting it again.
Yeah, I was able to take it using the link that you posted.
Okay, great. I just posted it again because it may have gotten lost in the chatter. So right now it should be the last thing you see. All right, thank you. So yes, we'll keep this open for another minute just to give you time to click on that survey. Please go ahead and take that. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for staying on. I mean, everybody pretty much kept on going till the end. These are not easy days, meetings after meetings. So we appreciate it. Please let us know if you want to collaborate. Let us know what you're working on. Interest in other, most of this team sounds like they were working on citrus, but there are a few who are working on other tree crops. That would be very valuable for this, you know, for us to be able to thoroughly translate what we're doing here to other tree systems. I have huge interest in that. Sarah mentioned her interest in that. So please let us know how we can work together to expand this work beyond citrus. Other tree crop farmers can benefit from it as well. All right, thanks everybody. If there's nothing else, like I said, we'll wait 1 more minute and that's it. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Great training. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.